Thank you for joining us today. The Office of Global Learning and the Graduate School have partnered for this panel to address graduate and professional students' concerns regarding immigration and academic issues related to the recent changes to the U.S. government's immigration guidelines. My name is Gustavo Flores-Macias. I'm on faculty in the Government Department, and I'm Associate Vice Provost for International Affairs. And our main objective today is to answer as many questions as possible about the implications of these recent immigration changes. Now, before we turn to our panelists, I would like to first recognize the challenges and anxiety that the rapidly changing landscape has brought to international students at Cornell and beyond. Many of you have shared directly with us the ways in which this has affected you, and I want to reassure you that we certainly appreciate this. Some of the accounts that you share with us were even included in Cornell's legal efforts to short-circuit the changes affecting international students. And in this sense, those accounts that you share with us themselves contributed to the government's retraction of the latest guidelines. I would also like to thank the Graduate and Professional Students International for compiling a list of questions for today's session, and the GPSA for their help with the event, as well as those of you who submitted questions online with registration for the event. What we'll do today is that we will begin by addressing these sets of questions before then opening the floor for additional questions throughout the session. And we ask you to do this, please, through the Q&A. Now, I should also note that today's session will focus on immigration and academic related questions. And next Friday, we will hold a separate session to discuss health considerations, including remote access to Cornell health resources and campus life. I should also note that we are still working on issues related to assistantships while abroad, which we recognize is a major concern. In fact, I already see that in the Q&A, it's, I think, the first question that was already posed. So we know that this is a major source of anxiety, and we are working on this. We will not touch this topic today. There's so much work going on behind the scenes. This is something that we're actively trying to address. And as soon as we have answers for you in this regard, we'll be posting them on the Office of Global Learning's FAQ on the website. We'll give everyone a heads up when we have information that becomes available. And finally, I'd like to thank our panelists for joining today. All of them, and many others who you don't see here, have been working hard behind the scenes on behalf of the international community. There's so much that is changing. There's so much information that needs to be digested before we can act on it. And we appreciate that they're making time to address some of these questions with you today. So I'll turn it over to Dean Knuth to introduce herself first.
Hello and welcome everybody. I'm Barbara Knuth. I'm Dean of the Graduate School.
Hi, I'm Laura Taylor. I'm the Senior Associate Director for International Services.
And I'm Elizabeth Shedd, Senior Immigration Advisor at the Office of Global Learning. So now we're going to start with our pre-submitted questions. The first batch of questions are going to be for the grad school, so they're all going to be directed for Dean Knuth. First question, what type of emergency resources are available to international graduate students who face financial hardship because of COVID-related disruptions?
Thank you. Emergency resources are available in what are called access funds through the Dean of Students Office in Student and Campus Life. The access funds will provide up to $500 per student to help mitigate barriers, access basic necessities, cover emergency expenses. You'll find information about the access funds on the Student and Campus Life website. Just search for access funds to find the application.
Yeah. Second question, if I am unable to start the semester in Ithaca because of a visa or travel restrictions, but then I am able to secure a visa, can I join courses in Ithaca mid-semester?
That's an interesting question. So first of all, I'll just say that that I'll address the kind of course-based and academic part of that question, but will say for any of these questions that if there are immigration issues associated with them, that would be something that you would need to consult international services on, and Laura may have something to say about that later. So if you've been enrolled in courses and attending remotely since the beginning of the semester, somewhere else outside of the Ithaca area, yes, you could move to Ithaca and continue attending those courses once you're living in Ithaca, starting mid-semester. However, the caveat is that many courses are going to, at enrollment, when you register for a course later this summer, many courses are going to ask you, are you registering to attend in person, or are you registering to attend remotely? And the reason that's being done is because the number of in-person seats is going to be limited. So it may not be that if you move to Ithaca mid-semester that there would be an in-person seat available to you. So in that sense, there may be no difference in the modality of the course for you if you move from somewhere to Ithaca mid-semester. That would be something that you would need to check with, in terms of the possibility with the instructor of the course for every specific course. Also keep in mind that you have to account for your own travel time, and you have to account that there might be a quarantine for up to 14 days, depending on what the public health requirements are in effect at that time. So it's complicated.
Yeah, and I'll say that it is complicated. For continuing students, the guidance being pulled back, the July 6th guidance, that retraction is wonderful for continuing students because it means you could return to Ithaca and you could continue to study online while you're here, even if an in-person seat were not available. At the present time, that situation is less clear for incoming students, and right now we're working to understand how this recent change will impact incoming or new students with respect to online coursework in the United States.
Thank you both for that. Next question, are TAs with immunocompromised or vulnerable family members exempt from teaching in person?
So graduate students who are appointed to TAs for the fall semester should first check with the TA supervisor in the department and their TA assignment to inquire what the anticipated plans are for that course. The role of selecting a teaching modality, meaning online or in person, as with any other curriculum matters at Cornell, are up to departments and faculty. So the department and the faculty will determine the course teaching modalities, which could be either online or in person with remote accessibility for most in-person courses. So the department may be able to offer flexibility and have the TA choose the modality. In many departments, that is in fact the case, that the curriculum is flexible enough so that the modality can be chosen. But if the original TA assignment from the department is for in-person teaching, but the TA needs remote teaching because of a vulnerable household member, the TA should discuss with the supervisor a different teaching assignment or modality. If the two of them discussing that issue can't reach a resolution, then they should consult with the director of graduate studies for the graduate field. If that doesn't reach resolution, then the department chair can enter into the discussion. If that doesn't reach resolution, then the dean's office can be consulted. And if that doesn't reach resolution, then the graduate school can enter into the discussion. But the point is that all units are aware that these are important, sensitive issues. And the intention through all the discussions that we've had with college deans, with department chairs, with DGSs, the intention is that resolution will be reached early in that sequence of discussion. But there is this process so that all parties are heard out fairly and can help identify creative options.
Next question, as it was submitted, is there a separate deadline for those who have to take online classes? And that question can be taken different ways. So let's assume that the question is, is there a separate deadline for registering for classes?
Yeah, the course enrollment deadlines will be announced, sometime coming up. And my understanding is that the course enrollment deadlines will be the same for all modalities of courses, because it's a course, and it will be just the modality will differ. So there may be different enrollment periods for different types of students. For example, undergraduate freshmen versus graduate students, like there usually is, but even that is not known at this point.
Next question, if I decide to go back to my country in the middle of the semester and take online classes there, is there anything that I need to keep in mind?
Again, if you travel in the middle of the semester, keep in mind the travel time and, the travel complications and the quarantines requirements, all of those kinds of things. So you might miss class time. Also keep in mind differences in internet accessibility and those kinds of things. And keep in mind that you may not be able to return to Ithaca at will if future travel restrictions are imposed either in your new location or in Ithaca or New York State. And again, in terms of if there are any immigration implications, I'd have to defer to Laura on that one.
So the good news is that for those who are currently active in SEVIS, who are continuing students, you will be able to leave the country and you can keep your SEVIS record active. The only thing that we need to be notified of is that you are leaving, because the instructions for keeping students' records active are that we make sure we update the address. And if you're departing the United States, we are supposed to indicate in the SEVIS database that you've departed for COVID-19 related reasons.
Will Cornell support and encourage graduate students who opt to remain in their home country and who are able to continue making progress on their degrees?
That relates to two different types of progress on degree. One is course-based progress and one is research-based progress. Most courses will be available, as we've talked about, in some remote or online format. So, again, most in-person classes are also going to have a remote component, or classes will be offered totally online. So most courses should be available no matter where you are. So you should be able to continue making course-based progress on your degree. For research degree students who are beyond courses, you'll need to determine with your special committee whether you would be able to continue making research progress remotely in your home country or remotely anywhere for that matter. It all depends on the kind of research that you're doing. Also keep in mind that there are specific eligibility criteria that need to be met, as most people are well aware of, for a research degree student to hold an assistantship while living abroad. And Gustavo, as Gustavo mentioned when we began, that those eligibility criteria are being examined by Global Learning, which is the office that is the lead on making these decisions and understanding the very complicated nuances that are involved. So right now, the eligibility criteria are explained and posted on the graduate school's COVID-19 website, and any updates that we get from Global Learning will be posted there, and as Gustavo mentioned, on the Global Learning COVID-19 FAQ site. So watch for those updates, and if there are any, I'm sure that'll be communicated to the graduate and professional community.
Thank you. So the next is just an observation for feedback. So it's the reopening plan has graduate TAs applying to opt out of teaching with copious documentation of their diagnosed illnesses. Not only is this forcing students to reveal their medical information, it also places an undue burden on international students, since the documentation required is usually US-centric. International students may also, due to a variety of reasons, including financial difficulties or medical infrastructure in their country, not have the required documentation to demonstrate vulnerability to in-person teaching.
Yeah, a great question, and it brings up a number of salient issues. So first of all, just to emphasize that TAs who need or prefer to teach remotely and whose department pedagogy decisions allow teaching remotely will teach remotely. Those TAs whose teaching assignment modality determined by the department does not match the need or the preference of the TA should register with Student Disability Services to identify appropriate accommodations. And I'll point out that I certainly understand and have heard concerns raised about the idea of, I think the term in the question was copious medical documentation. I would encourage all of you to do two things to find out more information. One, Zebediah Hall, who is the Director of Student Disability Services, will be on the Wednesday afternoon from 4 to 5 p.m. next week, town hall discussion for all graduate and professional students. And he'll be speaking directly to this issue. And he was on the town hall this past Wednesday night that Student and Campus Life sponsored for all students, undergraduate, grad professional, and parents. And he spoke to how Student Disability Services is addressing this issue. And what he explained, and you can see it on the video, is that how his office approaches the process of gaining information from students and working with students to determine appropriate accommodations is based on a non-medicalized approach, as he described it, based in social justice philosophy that recognizes that medical care and documentation is not equally available to all people. Also keep in mind that Student Disability Services does not share personal health history information with faculty. And likewise, students should not be sharing medical information with faculty, and faculty should not be requesting medical information from students. So if you run into any of those situations where people are, aside from Student Disability Services, are seeking medical information from you, let your DGS know, let the graduate school know, and we will intervene.
Thank you very much. Next question, will Cornell's decision to close and go fully online if there is a rise in cases include research? If yes, how will international graduate students be supported in the need to leave the country? What happens with all the leases that have already been signed, mostly for a year, if we are to leave the country without a known return date?
Complicated hypothetical question. So if there is a rise in COVID-19 cases in the campus community, in this situation, different from March, it is likely that there will be targeted phased responses, that are targeted to particular elements of the campus where the spikes in COVID, or how the spikes in COVID-19 are occurring, and not necessarily a total campus shutdown suddenly as there was in March. But if the campus does close down to most activities, including research, that doesn't necessarily mean that international students would need to leave the local community. In fact, you might not be able to leave the local community because of travel restrictions that are public health related, and it may be best to remain in Ithaca and conduct research or writing remotely from your local home here in Ithaca.
Most graduate students live in shared housing and cannot self-isolate at home. How are international students supposed to quarantine when they come back? Should their roommates also be quarantined? And further, is Cornell providing food and housing for them to quarantine alone?
Yeah, this is, again, is a complicated and evolving situation. So on this one, I consulted with Vice Provost Gary Koretsky, who's heading up the health planning dimensions for Cornell for the reactivation of campus in fall semester. So what he tells me is that all positive test results will be reported by Cornell to Tompkins County Health Department. The Tompkins County Health Department are responsible for managing isolation and quarantine, but in the case of Cornell students, this will be a shared effort with Cornell. So a plan for quarantine or isolation for each individual will be created between the health department and Cornell Health. Options may include for individuals to isolate or quarantine in their home if that's possible, or if that's not possible, to be moved to another Cornell location. Potentially the Statler Hotel is being examined for that, or to an off-campus location like a local hotel. So costs for housing in isolation or quarantine will be borne by Cornell, and a plan will be worked out for meals. Right now, it's anticipated that there would be a nominal charge for food that's supplied to the student while in quarantine, but the individual will not have to break quarantine to obtain food.
Yeah. Why are students being put in charge of monitoring their peers' behavior? Graduate RAs and mentors are not trained for this, and it puts already marginalized students at risk.
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I think it has to be taken in context that that I'll push back a little bit that that actually graduate RAs who are in, for example, West Campus housing facilities are trained, you know, to work with, and certainly to model appropriate behaviors are a standard expectation for graduate RAs. So if a graduate RA has any qualms, though, about the duties that they're being asked to carry out, especially concerns that they don't have sufficient training for those duties, they should alert their supervisor about that concern so the supervisor can provide appropriate training or modify the duties. Also remember that anyone can use the Cornell hotline to report inappropriate behavior, including feeling coerced by a supervisor to do something unsafe or unhealthy. The hotline is run by an external service called Ethics Point, and it provides a simple, anonymous way to confidentially report activities that may involve improper conduct. They're referred to the appropriate offices to do confidential inquiries, and your name is never released by Ethics Point to Cornell. So it really is an anonymous process.
Thank you. Students come into contact with hundreds of other students in a day. How will contact tracing be able to handle this?
You know, again, this is a responsibility of Tompkins County Health Department. They'll interview the individual and determine who is a true contact based on the time spent together, the distance between the interactions over a 2-day period prior to the onset of symptoms or prior to a positive test. Based on past experience, Vice Provost Koretsky tells me that the number of significant contacts identified for students is typically about 8 to 10, based on, again, you know, time together and the distance that was between the individuals.
Okay. And finally, how is Cornell going to mandate testing? Is it only students, or are faculty and staff also going to get tested every 5 days? What about students who are not on the student health insurance plan?
Yeah, so the July 15th message that I hope you all received, the July 15th message went out to all students from Vice President Lombardi and Vice Provost Koretsky, and explained some of the mandatory testing process. Not all the details are available, so more details, including details about the behavioral compact, will be coming soon. There will be no out-of-pocket costs for students to get tested, whether they're on the student health plan or not. And I can tell you that embedded in that July 15th message was one sentence that said, students and all Cornell employees will be subject to periodic surveillance testing. And I can tell you, I've heard from staff at Cornell that that was a surprise to them. So details are to come, and we'll all learn together more about what is going to be expected of everybody with regard to periodic testing, the frequency, and how it's going to be done.
Okay, thank you very much. Now the next questions are going to be directed to Laura. They're all focused on immigration. First question, I am currently in my home country and might not return to Cornell until October or later. To keep the CVIS record active so that I am eligible to apply for OPT in 2021, when will I need to return to the US?
That's a great question, and it's a little bit different now that the July 6 guidance has been retracted. So now that the July 6 guidance has been retracted, if you're a student that already has an active CVIS record and you wish to study at home for the entire fall semester, you may. We can keep your record active during that time, and we can count it towards OPT or CPT eligibility. The thing that is important, however, is in order to make the application for OPT, to file that petition with USCIS, you need to be physically present in the United States in F1 status. So you would need to make a plan to at least be here in time to make that in-person application.
Next question. Some embassies in the EU, for example, Madrid and Vienna, have announced that students with valid visas and I-20s will be exempted from the travel ban. Is this true?
Well, this is new news for us too. We just started hearing about this, I think Tuesday or Wednesday, the Department of State started announcing in some countries that this was going to be true. We're feeling a little cautious about it, however, because there's been no central announcement about exemptions from the travel bans from the Department of State. It's coming out locally in local embassies and consulates in some countries. So at present, I would be cautiously optimistic. If you decide that you want to make an attempt to enter the US, I guess right now we're not 100% sure that the ports of authority that would admit you all understand what's happening with this lifting of the travel ban for some individuals. But you would want to carry documentation from the embassy or consulate if you decide that you're going to make that effort.
After the rescission of the July 6th ICE guidance, will an international student who will remain outside the US, potentially for more than 5 months, but is, quote, able to meet the normal full course of study requirements, be able to maintain an active status in SEVIS?
Great question and an easy answer. The answer is yes. Yes, you can. The guidance now reverts back to March guidance, and the March guidance allows schools that are set up for emergency provisions due to COVID to allow students to be abroad for more than 5 months, and as long as they are continuing an active program of study, we can keep those SEVIS records active.
If international and in fact domestic students are currently in the USA and able to attend Cornell, does the university have any guidance on whether they can do the fall semester entirely by remote learning, assuming that ICE permits this?
For students who are continuing, who are active in SEVIS already, or who are at another school and were active in SEVIS in that school and transferring to Cornell, yes, you now may study remotely. That's a change that happened as a result of the retraction of the July 6 guidance for the fall semester.
If I study remotely outside the US or do study away, will that semester count towards my OPT or CPT requirement?
Again, the distinction between a new student incoming and a student who is continuing. For incoming students, we don't yet know, although past history would say that no, that time won't count. We would have to have clear guidance from SEVP that would permit this, and at present, time for initial students spent abroad, those who've not yet been in the country in F1 status, that time would not count. But for continuing students, time spent abroad, we can count towards eligibility for CPT or OPT.
Thank you. Can an international student drop the fall 2020 and/or spring 2021 session? How will the SEVIS record be impacted by a leave of absence?
Good question. And I'm glad it was asked because it's different. The 5-month rule would apply in this case if you do a leave of absence and you're no longer working towards a full course of study or enrolled at the university. There's some, I'll backtrack there. The provisions allow a person to be less than a full course of study if they're a continuing student too. But if you're not a student at all, so you're not enrolled at all, and you take a leave of absence, your SEVIS record will close. And if you're out for more than 5 months. So that's something to keep in mind for those that are thinking about taking a leave of absence.
Next question, considering the ICE rule has been rescinded, do any changes still need to be made to our I-20s? For example, indication of a hybrid institution?
That's a complex question. The simple answer is no, you don't need to have a notation on your I-20 anymore. The guidance of March 6 was retracted, and that was the only place in which a requirement to have a remark on the I-20 was required. So now that that's been rescinded, it's no longer required that there be a remark on the I-20 confirming that Cornell is a hybrid institution, that you will not be taking 100% online courses, etc. However, I think we heard this morning that some consulates may still be asking for an I-20 with an annotation. If you are in that situation and you have, you know that the U.S. consulate is asking for that, we certainly will accommodate those requests.
Thank you. Regardless of the withdrawal of the previous ICE announcement, will new students need to have their I-20 reissued with a new program start date of September 2nd?
Right now, we're working with all of the admissions offices to make sure that, that I-20s are updated. If you have an I-20 and you know, that I-20 says August 23rd or August 27th as a program start date, and we are able to update that date in the CBIS database, you may not need a new I-20 for travel. We don't need to issue a new I-20 when we make minor changes like that to a program start date. So we may be making that update in the background, but you shouldn't need a new document for that purpose.
Will the application of an OPT STEM extension be affected at all? For example, processing speed and success rate, given this situation right now?
This is pretty, this is difficult news. The USCIS service centers that process cards for OPT, as well as for J2 work permits and green cards, have experienced significant furloughs. And it's our understanding that at least one of those two centers has recently closed. So that is having an impact on processing times for cards. We don't know what the full impact will be yet. We're still in discovery phase. I think we learned about this a week or maybe a week and a half ago that the one of the service centers or processing centers was closing. So this, we do anticipate that this will have an impact on card production.
Next question, do you need a valid unexpired F1 visa to enroll in online classes and take them from your home country?
It's a good question, and that's also an easy answer. I like the easy answer ones. No, you don't need to have a valid visa to study in your home country remotely.
Next question, as the school calendar shows, after Thanksgiving, Cornell will turn to online teaching. Does this mean that all international students need to return to their home countries after Thanksgiving?
That's more complex because, again, we're still trying to work out how this would work for students who will be new in the fall semester as opposed to those who are continuing students. The good news is for continuing students, you would not need to leave. There'd be no impact on your status when the university moves to online teaching after Thanksgiving. We still don't know how this will impact new students. So new students for fall semester, that may not be true, but we will update you as soon as we have more information.
What happens in the event of an outbreak and Cornell moves online again in the middle of the fall 2020 semester? What are their contingency plans for international students if that happens?
Well, that might be partly a question for Barb. I'm not sure in terms of the contingency planning. I'm not sure what the contingency planning would be right now for students. I know that the answer with respect to immigration records and immigration status would be the same as for the previous question. For continuing students, you would be able to remain and stay in status, and we'll update you when we have more information regarding incoming students.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in that that really, I think this pertains to a question that I addressed earlier, that you know, again, if courses go totally online, aside from immigration issues, just academically, graduate professional students will be able to take those courses online. For research degree students, though, that's where the communication with your special committee, your faculty advisor, would be important to determine how to continue making progress on your research working remotely. You know, just as you did in March. You know, the contingency plan differs if it's course-based or if it's research-based, and for research-based will require communication and planning and interaction with your special committee to determine how to proceed. But you should be able to identify some writing, at least, that would be that could be done remotely.
Okay. So that is it for our pre-submitted questions, and now we're going to turn to questions that were submitted in the Q&A box. Given that some of these questions we can't answer right now, but we are working on the answer, and we'll have as much information as we can in the Global Learning COVID-19 FAQ page. So a few of these we won't be able to answer today, so I'll move on to ones that we might be able to answer more readily. First one is from Lucy. So I have a question about my entry to Cornell. If I come halfway through the fall semester, am I still eligible for the internship? My interview for the F1 was booked for August and in time, plus my travel from Australia was approved. However, it was canceled. I've requested an emergency interview. However, I'm not sure it will be approved. Given the circumstances that I was originally going to be there on time, can I still be eligible for internships? So I guess that's for Laura.
I think that's probably for me, yes. So I presume that the internship would be in the summer, that you're talking about a summer internship. And yes, if you're able to arrive in the fall semester, so you begin the semester remotely, and then you're able to arrive in F1 status to finish the semester here, we would count that term as term 1 for purposes of CPT OPT eligibility. Spring would be term or semester 2, so you would be eligible for a summer internship.
The next question is from Chue. I have a scheduled visa appointment on July 28th. Do I need to have an updated I-20 with a revised school begin date of September 2nd? Laura, I know you mentioned this. Can you say your answer again?
Yeah, so we can update CVIS records with changes in program start dates. It's not necessary for us to provide a form for that purpose. The officer at a U.S. consulate can actually see the change, that they can see what we put in the CVIS database for the program start date. So, so it's not required. We're working with admissions offices, however, and many will be sending out, or maybe not sending out, but making available new I-20s for you electronically. It's sort of how the admissions offices provide those I-20s to students is different in the different admissions offices. I can't say what all of them are doing, but we are working with them on this issue. And Elizabeth is actually one of the key people doing that. So Elizabeth, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, you covered it. Thank you, Laura. The next question I will direct to Dean Knuth. The question is from Mona. How about students who are in the US but prefer to study remotely due to health concerns? What are the provisions for those students?
Again, there should be instructions coming out with the instructions about how to register for courses. Lisa Nishi, Vice Provost, is leading that team working on teaching reactivation. And my understanding is that most courses, unless it's a like a, very required to be hands-on clinical course or something like that, is every course almost will have both an in-person and it will be either online, or if it's in person, will have a remote option. So most in-person courses will have a remote option. And the remote option is to accommodate those students who have health concerns or are required to quarantine or become ill and develop health concerns through the semester.
Thank you. Next question for Laura. A little bit of a nuance to something that we touched on earlier. And this is from Kush. If we get our visa only after Thanksgiving, will we still be allowed to come to campus, given that the program would have moved to being fully online?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. For continuing students, this should be fine. The closer you get to the end of the semester, though, just be aware, the more questions the port of entry may have when you actually arrive. They may ask you questions about why are you arriving so late in the term when the term only has a few weeks left to go. So the closer you get towards the end of the term, the more questions that officer may have. Unfortunately, there's no sort of bright line, like come by this date and you'll have no questions. It's just those officers have the right to ask questions about your intentions and your plans. And so that's one issue with arriving late if you're a continuing student, is just be aware that you may need to be prepared to answer those questions. If you are an incoming student, we're not clear that this would be permitted at all. So we need to examine this more closely, and we're doing that now. We're looking at the guidance that came out in March, and we're looking at the impact of the withdrawal of the July guidance and how that affects and impacts incoming students right now. So we'll be in touch soon about that.
Another question for Laura. Will international students be allowed to leave Ithaca and the US over winter break, or are we expected to stay here until the February semester starts?
Well, I think that if you leave, there are issues with, or you have to consider that you may not be able to get back, or if you get back, you may have quarantines that you didn't anticipate. Right now, for those that are here, I think we're recommending that people not travel because of these issues, and we don't anticipate that they will go away in the fall. So would you be permitted to leave? I'm not sure if there'll be guidelines that the institution puts in place around travel and restricting travel, but as far as immigration regulations go, sure, yeah, you could leave, but then, the question is, would you be able to get back in a timely way?
Next question, I think, is for Dean Knuth. It's from Anya. In case I will be able to arrive in the US no earlier than mid-September or the end of September, will I still be able to enroll in a course and select the in-person option?
That's a good question, and I think I would suggest when the enrollment, course registration information comes out, that you see if that question is addressed then. It may be that, that what you would be advised to do would be to enroll for the in-person option, but for the first week or so, whatever it is, you know, after September 2nd, before you're actually able to be in person, to be attending by remote, you know, for those particular courses. But reserve your in-person seat because you will be there shortly after the semester starts. I would not advise trying to jump into courses well after the semester has started. You know, the concern there is that students would just be falling too far behind, and it would be very, very hard to pick that up and catch up.
And another question for Dean Knuth does touch on the assistantship issue just from a different perspective. How will the fellowship or assistantship stipends be affected by changes in the academic calendar?
So those of you who are regular readers of graduate school announcements that comes out every Monday night in your email box, and who are regular readers of the Ask a Dean column will note that that question was asked and addressed in the Ask a Dean column. So I'll encourage you to take a look at that. But essentially the calendars for when appointment periods and stipends begin for fellowships and assistantships do not change with the change in the academic calendar. For fall, the academic calendar is essentially shifting just about a week. But the assistantship and fellowship stipends and appointments will begin as scheduled. And currently the spring semester stipends and appointments for fellowships and assistantships are scheduled to stick with the current, you know, the current appointment periods as scheduled. So there will be no gap in funding between the summer and the fall appointments or between the fall and the spring appointments.
And one helpful comment from our Q&A box, there is a difference in terminology between an RA as a resident assistant and a research assistantship. So in this context, we're talking about research assistantships, not resident assistants.
Well, yeah, I think that might be referring to the question that I was answering before about graduate RAs needing to enforce behaviors of undergraduates. I assume the question was about. I had interpreted that as resident assistants, you know, living in a residential situation. But the same response that I gave holds for research assistants as well, and teaching assistants as well. That if that you are expected, even under normal circumstances, to model appropriate behaviors for whoever you're working with, whether that's undergraduates or anybody else. So you would continue to do that. But again, if you're feeling uncomfortable, that you don't have the skills and the techniques to do that, talk with your supervisor about training or about a change in duties. Or again, if you're feeling coerced to do something that you're uncomfortable with, significantly uncomfortable with, and feel is, perhaps not appropriate or not ethical, do use the Cornell hotline to report that if you haven't been able to, if you don't feel comfortable getting resolution from your supervisor or your director of graduate studies or your department chair.
Thank you. I'm going to touch on Lucy's question because I think it's quite important to clarify now. Lucy asks, could I arrive in the US on a different visa while waiting for my F1?
And that's for me.
That's for you.
No, we don't recommend that you do that. If you come in under a waiver of the visa, an ESTA, or if you come in as a B1, B2, you're actually not permitted to study. It's a violation of those statuses to study. Cornell doesn't have a mechanism for limiting your enrollment, so Cornell would not disallow you from enrolling necessarily, but you should understand that it's a violation of the status to come in as a tourist and study. It would also be, it's also very, very difficult to change status from a tourist or visitor status to student. In fact, for visitor status, changes of status within the United States are not possible. So returning an F1 status would require travel and re-entry.
Next question is from Alex. Would you advise, and also for Laura, would you advise incoming international students stuck abroad to defer for the fall semester, given that studying remotely might not count towards OPT and CPT?
I'm sorry, I'm just not prepared to answer that question right now, Elizabeth. We are still working out how we're going to, how we have to look at the guidance that came out in March. We have to look at the effect of the retraction that that occurred on Tuesday, and so it's still very early days. We haven't really had enough time to assess this yet.
The next one I think I could answer, actually. This is from Richard. He's wondering if he has an unexpired F1 visa with a different institution name other than Cornell on it. Can I still come to the US with that visa and the I-20 issued by Cornell, or should I apply for a new F1 visa? So Richard, if we were talking by phone or email, I would actually ask to see a scan of your visa stamp. So you can Dropbox that to me and I'll take a look and I'll see if it's still useful for travel for you. Next question, for the incoming PhD students, is remote learning discouraged due to the fact that the students have to find an advisor during the first 2 semesters? So that's for Dean Knuth.
Yeah, that's a great question. And for incoming doctoral students, this really is a context dependent question and situation. And I would just encourage that, that doctoral students be in touch with their graduate field. What I mean by this is that some graduate doctoral programs are very much only course-based in the first year, and so those courses may in fact be online or offered, you know, in person and remote, and so no problems at all. But for those programs, and this is particularly true in the life sciences, but also to some degree in physical sciences and engineering and other fields, that the first year is inherently geared towards research and towards doing rotations. So like, you know, studying for 6 to 8 weeks under one advisor and then moving to another advisor for the next 6 to 8 weeks and so on throughout the first academic year. So over the course of those rotations, you learn about different faculty, they learn about you, and then by the end of the first year, you can select your advisor and the advisor, you know, selects the students that they're going to be working with. If your field has that kind of rotation mechanism, it may be unlikely, frankly, that can be done anything but in person for the research component, you know, during fall semester or fall and spring semester. You know, courses are a different question, but the in-person research that requires rotations and that kind of you know, hands-on interaction, that may require that you defer until next fall. So you really need to be in touch with your graduate field about that.
We only have about 4 more minutes. I'll try to get through another couple questions though. If we were to remain in our home country and continue with our program remotely for the fall, what do we need to do or who do we need to inform such that we can continue maintaining an active status in CVIS?
That's a great question. So you would want to contact our office and just let us know that you're planning to be abroad during this time. And again, in CVIS, the instructions for those of us that work in international services is that we are expected to update the CVIS record with a note that you are abroad due to COVID-19.
Next question from Shruti. Will the new format and schedule impact international students who are planning on graduating early? Probably for either one of you, I think, Laura or Dean.
I don't actually, that's a good question that I don't have the answer for.
Yeah,
Right now.
so I think, you know, just what would affect graduating early is whether the courses you need to meet your academic requirements are going to be available to you in the fall. You know, it's not guaranteed that every single course that has ever been offered by Cornell under normal circumstances is going to occur in the fall. So I think the question there is to wait until to see for course enrollment, you know, what's going to be available. Most courses will be available, but you know, I can't guarantee that every single one that you might be required to take is going to be available. We just don't know at this point. I wonder too if I could just jump in and address one of the questions that was in the Q&A later on. So I'm not sure if we're going to get to it, but it was, so the question is, it might be worth noting quickly that mask wearing is highly politicized, so this isn't a regular enforcement of rules for undergraduates. Here I'll note that the behavioral compact for Cornell that all students will be required to adhere to and to sign will require mask wearing. You know, some sort of face covering will be required. So whether it's politicized or not, no matter what your political views are, everybody will be required to do that in Cornell buildings, and for outdoors, there will be, you know, specific requirements with regard to that as well. But in buildings, you will need to be wearing a mask, and so again, it'll be a social norm, whether it's politicized or not. Kind of doesn't matter in this context because it will be a requirement of being on the Cornell campus.
Maybe I'll jump in and formally thank our panelists for the time and taking the time to answer these questions. I know that as soon as we finish this call, basically all of us have to go back to trying to find solutions and answers to some of the questions that we couldn't answer today. I want to thank as well all of you for joining us. And, you know, some of the questions that we weren't able to address or we didn't get to from the chat, we will go through that chat and we'll be updating our FAQ page on our website, on the Global Learning website. And as soon as we have answers regarding the assistantships and payment, we will also make sure to include that information and to give everybody a heads up that we'll be posting that. You know, I think it's a time, we have a lot of anxiety and things are changing fast. And I hope everybody will understand that the fact that we don't have all the questions, you know, we're working around the clock. And since things are changing so fast, even the changes from last Tuesday and Wednesday, we need to be very careful digesting what they mean legally, because, you know, the consequences, the stakes are high if we do not interpret them correctly. So I want to thank you again for your understanding, and thank you again for our panelists for taking the time. And I hope you all are well and take good care of yourselves. And next week, I hope to see many of you as well at the session we'll hold for all international students regarding access to health resources. So thank you again.